Isn't this a great afternoon? I mean, it's just the education and the compassion. It's very inspiring. And I'm sure we'll be inspired by our next speaker, Kamran Bokhari, author and scholar. He's a well-known analyst, commentator, and an author. He also serves as an advisor to a think tank and Global Intelligence Institute, Stratford, in the Middle East and South Asian affairs. He is the author, along with Farid Senzai, of Political Islam in the Age of Democratization. His second book, Voices of Jihad, The Push for a New Caliphate, will be published in the summer. And the quote that came to me for you, sir, was, each problem has a solution, and each solution has a new problem.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thank you to the organizers for putting this panel together. 8 minutes. Okay, so we'll see what we can do in 8 minutes. We will hear about IS, ISIL, ISIS, Daesh, as the Arabs would call it. But it's just the latest manifestation of a deeper malaise that is much longer than the few years that Daesh has been around, or IS. And that's called radical Islamism or jihadism. I mean, you can pick your terminology. So how do we combat it? Well, there are two ways of combating, because it's operating on two fronts. For us as the Canadians, it's here in some shape or form. As the unfortunate incidents in Ottawa and Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu were made very clear, that IS and its ideology is here. So that's one part of how to, that is the one challenge, which is called homegrown extremism, homegrown terrorism. But the core of IS is based in Iraq and Syria, and that's a foreign policy issue. I'm going to avoid talking about that because that has to do with geopolitics. That brings in, the regional dynamics, the regional rivalries, competition between countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar. And of course, the United States is leading a coalition. And so that's a complicated mess. I think let's stick to what we can do here in Canada to protect ourselves. I think the first speaker really laid it out, our friend who represents the Jewish community, he laid it out really well. But this is essentially and correct me if I have misquoted you, that this is an issue related to the Muslim community. In a recent op-ed in the Toronto Star, I said the law enforcement community, the intelligence security establishment of our country are doing a great job in terms of making sure that those who are out to do harm, they be stopped. But they can't police ideology. That's the job of the Canadian Muslim community. And I think that, unfortunately, I'll have to say that most of the Canadian Muslim community is not represented here in this room. There are certain voices. Those voices are the ones that are courageous, who have basically stepped up to the plate and said, you know what, this is a problem, we need to address it. But the bulk of the Muslim community, I'm talking about many mosques, many Islamic centers, organizations, they still are either still searching for a way on how to address this, or quite frankly speaking, don't know how to deal with this. They're caught somewhere in a complex web of competing identities and inertia, for lack of a better term. They definitely have to come to the front line. Ultimately, if we're going to defeat Islamist radicalism, if we're going to protect ourselves from religious extremism, from a subset of the Muslim community, it's going to have to be the mainstream Muslims who are going to have to combat that. And they have to be brought in, because ultimately they don't have ownership. If we, there are groups that are savory, less savory. They are, there are different groups, and I will differ with the speaker who just spoke. There is a certain degree of relativity here, in the sense that if we label everybody as extremists, then who are the moderates? And if you think about it for a second, who needs to moderate? It's the extremist who has to moderate. And if we can't reach out to those who are extremists, then we're just preaching to the choir. then we're not making any headway. We can gather here like this, and I think every one of us in this room is on the same page. But the problem is there are many people, far more than in this room, who are not on the same page. How do we reach out to them? I mean, that is our challenge. Definitely, we don't have a monolithic Muslim community. No one, I agree with the previous speaker, there is no one Muslim group that can speak for all Canadian Muslims. Even in a, you can't even claim that on a level of a city. Even in Mississauga, you can't claim that, or even in a neighborhood. Language is important. We have to be very careful in terms of using our language, lest we use a language that sort of alienates people in the sense that we want to use the words de-radicalization, counter-extremism, moderation. These are specific words that mean different things, and we have to be very, very careful about that, because ultimately what we need to do is we need to wage a jihad against jihadism. And that's basically our goal here. What is jihadism? Jihadism is basically what the previous speakers have said. An ideology that says that, it's our way or the highway. And that's completely contradictory to Canadian values or even basic human decency. I mean, Canadian values is far higher. I mean, at a basic level of human decency, that those things don't, we can't tolerate that. But we have to be very careful. This is a swamp. If we're going to dry the swamp up, and I mean by the swamp, I mean by the swamp of extremism, we have to have partners. We often talk about that there is a mainstream Muslim community. I would argue that mainstream has yet to be defined. There are many people who claim to be mainstream, and it's a contested concept, but I think that the mainstream has yet to emerge. We have yet to see a mainstream in which we can bring all people to the center and say, you know what, we can't go to the extremism in this direction and that direction. So that center has to be defined. How much more time do I have left? 1 minute, 30 seconds? Okay, so the bottom line is that if our goal here is moderation, our goal here is countering violent extremism, our goal here is de-radicalization, but these things mean something specific, and we need to go beyond buzzwords. We have to think critically, and we have to act very carefully, and we have to reach out to the bulk of the Muslim community that unfortunately we don't have representatives from those communities here today in this room. I'll leave you with that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for that insight. And actually checking on how many minutes you have left. This is a terrific panel. I think you should do a seminar on how to keep talking. I appreciate that.